Hello and welcome to Behind the Headlines. We're here today with Norristown Councilman Marlon Millner and with Reverend Jeffrey Brown out of Boston. I want to welcome our guests today. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Nice to be here.
Reverend Brown, you were invited by the Norristown Weed and Seed Steering Committee, which you sit on, Marlon, to address youth violence in Norristown.
Absolutely.
Why don't you just take a couple of minutes, first minutes of the show here, and just tell us about your organization and how you go about addressing youth violence.
Sure. The Boston TenPoint Coalition, the organization I co-founded 20 years ago, is a faith-based group that has a commitment from faith leadership to go out into the streets, out of the four walls of their sanctuaries, to meet the youth where they are. Those who are involved in gangs, drugs, involved in the violence. Okay. And what happened during that process is that we started to build partnerships with unlikely constituencies like the Boston Police Department and the Department of Probation and city and community agencies. And as a result of that level of partnership, we had some success in our city. We had a 79% reduction in violent crime between 1990 and 98, and a 29-month period in which we had 0 juvenile homicides. So that's part of the process.
Well, timing couldn't be better, and I guess you guys got together and you decided to bring the Reverend in. How did you know about Reverend Brown? How did you hear about his work?
Well, Stan, before I had the pleasure of moving here to Norristown, I did my seminary studies. I'm a minister as well, in Boston, and met Reverend Brown. He was one of several clergy who were, in fact, friends of mine, became mentors and examples of what I would aspire to do in parish ministry. So I learned about the 10-point model. I learned about what the churches were doing directly and how the churches were working with law enforcement, with local government, with district attorney and other agencies to bring about a coordinated and comprehensive strategy to reduce youth violence. So I knew him personally, I knew the program personally, and of course I've become involved in trying to maintain my promise when I ran for office to work on youth violence. And since I knew a model that worked, we're not trying to replicate that in Norristown, but we are trying to share what some people have learned and what Reverend Brown has now been able to share around the country.
Well, with those kind of numbers, I don't know. I'm thinking you might want to replicate it. You couldn't be here at a better time, as far as I'm concerned. Marlon might have shared it with you, but I actually wrote a front page commentary about a week or so ago. A young man by the name of Ryan Latson Singleton was killed, 21 years old. It's happening here in Norristown. It's a huge issue. Just last May, I think it was, a 16-year-old girl was shot and killed. It's a big problem. Basically, I'm calling everybody on the carpet, including Norristown Council, including our county commissioners. It's time for drastic measures. And if it means bringing somebody in from the outside to address these issues, I'm certainly all for it, and I'm hopeful that the community feels the same way.
Sure.
It's almost to the point where I'm thinking martial law might be instilled. But why don't you tell us, give us a couple of specifics about this program, though? I mean, what can you actually do? Is it curfews? Is it working with the individual organizations, or is it with trying to go out and just reach the kids themselves?
Well, it's about reaching the kids and building relationship with the kids. But more specifically, we're trying to mobilize the faith community in Norristown to begin doing that process, and that'll be the linchpin of a larger collaborative process. So what is novel about this is that the clergy, and specifically the pastors, will play a very clear role, in a larger comprehensive strategy. So we're talking about clergy coming out and walking the community at night during times in which the youth themselves are out there. We're talking about them when memorials are erected, when someone is killed, and the youth gather around, being there with them during that time, having prayer with them, and helping them deal with the trauma that occurs around that. We're talking about working in the hospitals, emergency rooms when a shooting occurs and family and friends gather around, and because a lot of retaliation is can come out of something like that. So intervening in that becomes important. We're talking about the kinds of ministries in which your church can be a safe haven for youth. So during the night you have a lot of youth who have nothing to do, and so they find things to do. But if you had a building in which they can go and hang out and do things, and then have safe travel from that building back to their homes.
Right.
That could be another intervention. But we're trying to talk to faith leaders about how they can become more involved in this process and not just preach the funerals. We're also talking about them teaming with law enforcement and the DA's offices, the public defender's office, city agencies that may have a focus around youth violence, and to talk about ways in which they could join a collaborative process by which you can comprehensively address youth violence in all the sectors.
Yeah, and I think what I liked probably most about all that was going to these memorials when they happen, because inevitably there's always a vigil, there's always a memorial that pops up, and that's where the kids are. I mean, certainly I can appreciate that, getting the Norristown Ministerium involved, and I think we were going to have Reverend McCrae on, but he couldn't make it today. A lot of these kids aren't going to church.
Right.
So by addressing the ministerium, what are you hoping that takes place after that?
Well, what I'm hoping that they can see that there are ways in which they can interact and intersect with these youth that go beyond proselytizing and evangelism. That this is not an evangelism effort. This is a public safety effort in which we are trying to end the era of violence in our community. It has enveloped the community, and since you are a community institution, a long-standing positive community institution within the city, it is your responsibility to be able to step up to the plate. And it also fits with a person's gospel or spiritual mandate to care for the least of these. And so talking to the ministers, getting them to see that, and getting them to understand that rather than walking the streets with a Bible, with a tract, and trying to get someone to join your church, you just need to be the Bible, and your presence can be an influence for the lives of many of these youth.
Well, like I said, your timing couldn't be better with what's been taking place here in Norristown over the past few weeks. But obviously, you're not moving to Norristown. So what happens with Norristown Weed and Seed after the Reverend leaves?
Well, Stan, one of the things we hope that will happen is when we had Reverend Brown come last year, he really was able to give an inspirational talk. And he did an event that we did in the park, that churches did in the park for youth. And then he did just a brief presentation to about 20 leaders, school district, police department, community groups, people from cops and community, and pastors were there. But that wasn't enough for us to realize how we might formally build partnerships with the police department or reach out to the district attorney. So one of the things that has happened here is, though Bishop McCrae couldn't be with us today, Bishop McCrae, as the president of the ministerium, was with Reverend Brown in a series of really frank and candid meetings on yesterday. We met with the district attorney, and we met with the assistant DA for the juvenile division, and with a member of the detectives. We met with the chief public defender and the office of the public defender. And so the churches, the pastors, and Bishop McCrae in particular, were able to begin a process of conversations that may have happened in the past with some other preachers or with some other leaders, but we need to renew and restart those kinds of direct linkages and partnerships. So Weed and Seed hopes to continue to be a table, as it was formed to be, of residents, of community leaders, of law enforcement, and of human service agencies talking about how to work together. And we've been largely doing that, even though we were able to obtain the $27,000 grant that was set aside, and a piece of that has brought Reverend Brown here. We've largely been a table that says we care about the violence. It's not about if we have some money. It's about what can we do when we talk to one another. We didn't talk to the DA's office or the Office of the Public Defender or the Norristown Police Chief, Russell Bono, and the town manager yesterday about dollars. Those were meetings that, at least in the 7 years I've been here, have been unprecedented, that we're meeting with all these different leaders talking about one topic: youth violence, gun violence. How can we reduce it? How can we eliminate it? What will it take? You know, having frank conversations where law enforcement says what they expect of community groups and churches, and having frank responses where the churches and community groups can feel free to say back to the town manager or to the police chief what we expect of them. And beginning this process, hopefully out of this, we'll begin to hold each other accountable. I think after we'll have heard Reverend Brown for 2 days, all sides will know too much about how we can work together to not work together. So we'll look to the Times-Herald to hold all of us accountable. The police department now knows too much. They've trained. Chief Bono has been an advocate. He wrote a letter of support about this approach a year ago, just from one brief interaction with Reverend Brown. He had a meeting again, a direct meeting with Reverend Brown. The people from Montgomery County Family Services who are trying to launch a gang intervention model have met with us. Reverend Brown and the churches built a nationally recognized model of street worker intervention. Reverend Brown is an expert on training youth workers to go out and interact with gang-affiliated youth. We need to now hold people accountable for having talked with him, having dialogued with him, having received instruction, and what we know too much now. So it's not just about giving out backpacks and having block parties, but it's about what is it going to take to identify the toughest and most hardened gang-affiliated youth and get them off the street, and the kids who are simply caught up in the mix, offering the right mix of programming. The other piece we already knew before Reverend Brown came back from when he was here a year ago was he told us, you go out on the street when the kids are out on the street.
Right.
And you don't preach to them, but you ask, what can we do about the violence? I mean, for me, it was amazing what we actually saw prove true. So the kids at midnight and at 1 o'clock in the morning, regardless of your view on curfew, have told us, well, they've told us the things we could do. And those are things now we ought to hold the community responsible for. Look, I know this may be controversial. When I was 16, 17, particularly during the summer when we were walking last summer, I didn't want to be in the bed. Now, I lived in a community where I was most likely in the house at midnight, but I wasn't asleep. So if I'm in a more urban environment like some of the neighborhoods of Norristown, I might want to be out playing basketball. I might want to be out playing video games in a safe environment.
Right.
No one's providing that. We now know from being out on the street that kids want a safe environment. Some of us remember going to bowl or going to roller skate.
Sure.
And those activities now, many of them are gone, or people lack accessibility. We also know, Stan, to be fair, when we've been out on the street, I've seen good kids who I know who are connected with this good grassroots group doing something, or that good grassroots group, but they're still out at midnight or 1 a.m. There's one kid, I'm not going to name the program, very positive program. The kid was out because his electricity was turned off. Right?
Yeah.
It was hotter in the house than it was out on the street.
Right.
So that's the other thing, that when we put the kids first, we come into full contact with if there's dysfunction in the home, if there's a lack of resources in the home, if there's violence in the home that's now being acted out by the kid on the street. We come face to face with those things, and hopefully all of us now will be held responsible and accountable for now we know too much. Once we start interacting with the kids directly, the kids are saying, here's what we need.
I think that's key.
We have a responsibility to deliver.
Yeah, I think reaching the kids where they are, like you said, they're out at midnight. Let's not kid ourselves. With the curfews, whatever it is, they're out there. So reaching them on that level, I think, has to happen. Really like what you said about all the organizations, though. I mean, because let's face it, we all know about grant money, and it could be gone, and Weed and Seed just came back after being gone. So, you know, it is a case where we need to get everybody involved, and certainly the Times-Herald is going to be right there reporting on anything that we can, and still, like I said, holding the officials to their word. If they're going to come out and tell us we're behind this, and we're going to, well, like you said, let's hold them accountable, and let's make sure that they are. Mm-hmm. Gentlemen, certainly appreciate you being here today.
Nice being here.
Thank you.
And my name's Stan Huskey. I'm the editor here at the Times-Herald, and we appreciate you watching.